Tonight, we descend.
They told me not to ask about the auction, not to whistle after dark, not to open the envelope my uncle left me. I broke all 3 rules my first night in the bowl.
The road up the mountain was wrong quiet. The kind of quiet that presses at the windows and listens when you speak. Pines dripped a slow resin that smelled like old churches. My rental sedan climbed a ribbon of frost-bitten asphalt, and the radio died somewhere around the first jagged switchback. It didn't sputter, it didn't fade, it simply went still, as if the air had swallowed the signal whole and held it in a closed fist. I had come for a week, maybe 2, to clean out a cabin my uncle left behind and decide whether I could afford to keep it. If you've ever inherited a place that you remember only from summers with lemonade and moths dusting the screen door, you know the ache of it. The deed had my name on it. The town had its own name, too. A thin inked thing on a map, but people up here just called it the bowl. The mountains made a ring, and we sat like a prayer inside it. The bowl did not greet me with signs or smiles. The buildings wore their age the way dried flowers wear dust. Windows had thick curtains, doors had double doors. Even the chimneys had little louvered caps on them, like the houses were trying to keep something out or keep something in. I noticed blankets pinned over vents in a diner, and coils of salt hung like garlands over lintels. When the waitress poured my coffee, she did it without clink or scrape. The spoon she left was wooden. The menu didn't list bacon or sausage. The fryer was cold. The whole place smelled like boiled eggs and varnish. At the register was a jar the size of a fishpole with a strip of paper scotch-taped to the glass. On the paper was a single word in thick marker. Shh. Loose bills lay inside it. Nobody put coins in. Coins dared to speak when they collided.
You'll want the cabin aired out before dusk.
I asked why, but she only pushed a roll of plastic sheeting across the counter, along with a staple gun and a folded sheet of instructions that read like emergency procedures for a storm that had no weather. The cabin sat at the bend where the road turned mean. In photographs, it had been all knotty pine and cheerful porch. In reality, it looked like something abandoned by the sound of a hymn. The door stuck. When it opened, the smell that knifed out was heavy and sweet, like damp books and rusted coins. I stood on the threshold, listening. The mountain listened back. I set my bags down and went room to room with a practiced briskness I did not feel. Cabinets, drawers, a moth-eaten quilt, a photo of my uncle, chin tilted, half smiling, as if some private joke had wandered into the room and sat beside him in a chair you couldn't see. Beneath that frame, tucked where dust made a soft fur, was an envelope with my name on it. The handwriting sloped like an apology. Inside was a single sheet. If you stay beyond the 7th night, choose your bid early. The auction finds latecomers. Don't whistle after dark. Then a small brown smear. Thumb-shaped, dry, old. I told myself it was coffee. I told myself a lot of soothing, stupid things. I didn't ask the bull about the auction that day. I would pretend later that I was being respectful, but the truth is I was afraid the town's folklore might answer back. The silent tier had a personality. It stood in corners and followed you into the hall. If you dropped a fork, it didn't ring. It made a dent. When the sun slid behind the ring of mountains, the shadows rose up from the trees like something ecstatic had been released. I stapled plastic over the vents because the instructions said to. I laid a rolled towel at the base of the door. I turned off the lights to listen. The darkness felt padded, close, a theater curtain drawn across an empty stage. That's when the floorboards made their first sound. A single, patient creak from the far bedroom, the one with the quilts and the photograph. I waited for a second creak. When it came from the kitchen. The next morning, I took the envelope and the instructions to the diner. The waitress skimmed them with a glance, the way a nurse learns to memorize bad news. She didn't look at me when she pushed them back.
Everyone has a first night.
I told myself to ask outright. Are there animals in the walls? Is the mountain settling? Is there gas that moves wood or pressure that cracks joints? What is the auction? But the bowl is not a place where you grow a spine quickly.
You came in after the last frost. The hall's already being dressed.
His voice didn't carry. It crouched at the table with him, eyes lowered. I latched on to the word hall, like I had a right to it. The hall turned out to be an old timber lodge at the center of town. The kind of place you rent for weddings you later regret, and potlucks where the macaroni congeals and no one touches the jello. Except here, every window had been painted from the inside with a flower I did not recognize. The petals were long and thin and white at the tips, and in the center there was no color at all. If you looked too long, the emptiness in the middle seemed to pull at your gaze, and your ears felt full, the way they do on a plane that is descending too fast. A woman outside was tying candles to a strand of raw twine. She worked quickly, fingers nicked and wax burned. Their wicks were all uncharred, and there were far too many of them. It takes a lot of light to keep a thing like silence in its chair.
If you aren't bidding, you'll want the back. Don't sit near the jars.
Jars. She said it like a warning, not a curiosity. I kept walking, but I wasn't fooling anyone. The bowl has a way of knowing who is new. When I got back to the cabin, someone had slid a folded card under my door. On the front was a flower, those same white-tipped petals, that same empty center. Inside was a time, after the 7th bell. No date. The bowl assumed you would know. The second night, the Creeks decided to learn to walk. They practiced a path from the back bedroom to the kitchen, a slow, steady route like a worn habit. I sat at the table and read a book with a title I couldn't remember when morning came. Each time my eyes slid across a sentence, the house took a step. When I tried to pretend it wasn't happening, the quiet filled with a faint, breathy sound like someone whispering into a cold bottle. Not words, not language. A rehearsal of the shape of words without the air to carry them. On the third day, I found a crack in the plastic sheeting I'd stapled over a vent. The edges were curled like an eyelid. I patched it and told myself the staples had failed. It is miraculous, the work your mind will do to remain inside a room it can understand. In the hardware store, a wall calendar had a date circled in blue pencil. No number, just a ring around an empty square. The clerk slid my change across the counter, careful that the bills did not snap.
If you have things you'd like to keep, voices, songs, clock chimes, you might want to make recordings. Even those don't always hold.
Have you ever realized all at once that a place was bent around a rule you don't know? The bowl was built on that feeling. I walked back to the cabin with tape and extra sheeting and a list in my head. Voicemail from my mother, wind chimes on my phone, a video of rain. I didn't mean to keep them because I thought they could be stolen. I kept them because I was beginning to understand they could be bought. On the fourth night, I slept on the couch with my boots on and the envelope under my pillow. The steps in the house paused a few feet from my head and did not cross the rug. The whispering had found its breath.
It threaded itself through the seams of the room like someone tugging a needle through canvas, embroidery in reverse. I wanted to call someone. I wanted to walk out into the snow and scream, just to see the scream hang on the air. I swallowed it the way you swallow a seed. The flyer appeared tacked to the lodge door on the 5th morning. I read it 3 times to convince myself it contained actual words. Auction of silence. Bring what is yours to offer. Bring proof. Bring witnesses if you must. After the 7th bell. Beneath it, a list that was not a list. A hand-drawn eye. A vein pricked and beating. A clock face with its numbers written backward. Proof. Evidence that time and blood and truth had been spent. That afternoon, the old man from the diner walked the road past my cabin. He wore a hat with a feather in it, like a man going to church. He paused and touched the brim in a way that felt ceremonial.
Your uncle bid well the last time.
I told him I hadn't known. He nodded like I'd confirmed a weather report.
Silence is harvested from houses whose owners have more than they can bear. The town apportions it. The hall weighs it. The jars hold it until a winner can carry it home without spilling.
I asked what the jars looked like. His eyes went somewhere I couldn't follow.
Like breath you can see, like fog that learned manners.
That night, my phone recording of rain stuttered and went mute in the middle of a storm I had captured 2 summers ago. I turned the volume up all the way. Nothing. And then a soft shape of noise, like a hand smoothing down a cat's fur. I deleted the file because I did not want to hear it do that again. I deleted my mother's voicemail for the same reason. I have not forgiven myself. On the 7th day, the bull rang its bells. They were not church bells. They were plates, struck with soft mallets, hollow and bone-colored, the sound of a breath held in an empty ribcage. People came from up the mountain and down from whatever else was higher. They moved as if the gravel would shout if they trod too hard. The lodge doors stood open. Candlelight met us in a low wave. Hundreds of small flames hung on twine, trembling with purpose. The painted flowers on the windows stared at us with their blank centers. On the far table, in the near dark, I saw the jars. The jars were not glass. They were made from something that remembered being alive. Their surfaces weren't smooth. They had a grain, a direction. When a person walked past one, the jar's skin tightened, the way a human arm will when a cold draft finds it. Inside, a mist moved in arrhythmic pulses, as if listening and holding its breath at the same time. Each jar had a tag knotted to its neck with a loop of twine. The tags didn't have names. They had addresses. While we stood there, while we took ourselves in like we were strangers to our own eyes, a figure stepped onto the raised dais at the lodge's heart. They wore black that drank the light, and a collar made of those same bone-colored plates. When they lifted their hand, the room made a sound like everyone swallowing at once.
Bring forth your offers.
The auction began not with a gavel, but with the soft tolling of the bone-colored plates struck in rhythmless sequence until the room's silence bent like heated glass. The candles guttered without smoke. Shadows clung to the beams as though afraid to step down among us. The elder auctioneer's voice carried like it had been pressed flat and then folded back open again.
Bring forth your offers.
One by one, townsfolk stepped forward, A woman with gray braids opened her palm and let 3 drops of blood fall into a shallow stone dish. The dish hissed as though the blood had burned it, and a jar on the table closest to her rattled in its bindings. The mist inside bloomed white, then settled, and the tag around its neck curled as if in acknowledgement. A man in a wool coat unspooled a pocket watch from his waistcoat. He wound it backwards 7 clicks, then snapped the lid shut. The sound was sharp, final, like a small neck breaking. His hands trembled, but the elder auctioneer only nodded. Another jar shifted. The mist inside folded upon itself, then pressed outward, like lungs deciding not to breathe. Then came the strange ones. A child no older than 10 whispered into the hollow of a cupped conch shell and sealed it with wax. When the wax cooled, her mother placed the shell on the table. Another bidder laid down a folded letter, edges yellowed, the script so faint I could not read it. The elder auctioneer touched it with a fingertip, and the words bled black for 1 brief second before sinking into the page and vanishing forever. The jar before them swelled. I realized then that every jar corresponded to a house, an address scrawled on its tack, and with each bid, silence was siphoned, weighed, harvested. Not metaphoric silence, not poetic, the soundlessness of a kitchen at night, the hush of curtains in a draft, the lull of sleep unbroken. These were taken, fraction by fraction, until the jars quivered fat with it. What happened to those who lost their silence? I remembered the creaks in my cabin, the whispers like breath in a bottle, the sound of something rehearsing words in the dark, and I understood. What one gained, another lost. My uncle had bid before. The old man had said so, and my cabin's silence had not held. The footsteps, the whispers, they were not hauntings, not in the usual sense. They were overflow, silence spilled elsewhere, replaced with voices that did not belong. The auction went on for hours, though time bent strangely inside the lodge. Each strike of the bone plates did not divide minutes, but stretched them thin, pulled them taut until they snapped. I thought it was midnight a dozen times. I thought dawn was clawing through the windows, only to find the painted flowers had tricked me with their pale centers. At last, the elder auctioneer raised a hand. The bidding slowed. What remained unsold was silence too stubborn to be coaxed, silence rooted in homes that had not yet bent. The elder auctioneer's gaze passed over me. I felt my chest constrict, as if the lodge itself had drawn a curtain across my throat.
New blood.
Every head turned. They had known all along. The town had been watching me, waiting for my 7th night, my uncle's cabin, my inheritance, my silence. I shook my head, but silence isn't something you can keep by denial. It is weight. It is measure. It is taken whether you offer it or not. The elder auctioneer beckoned. I stepped forward like a man summoned to kneel at an altar. My hands were empty. I had nothing to give but the breath in my lungs, the years in my bones, the secrets in my heart. The jars before me stirred, their mist curling against the inside skin as if tasting me.
Choose your bid.
The hall swayed. My uncle's note burned in my memory. Choose your bid early. too late. The bowl had already written me into its ledger. My silence was already on the table, tagged and waiting. The question was only, how much more would I bleed to keep what remained? I heard the woman with the twine whisper behind me.
Don't offer years. They take them all.
The man with the pocket watch rasped low.
Secrets rot faster. They'll sour in the jars.
My mouth was sand. My tongue scraped like stone. I had no idea how to buy silence, how to barter with what I did not understand. The lodge leaned closer. The candles hissed. The jars tightened their skin. I felt my own house, my uncle's house, breathing at the back of my skull, every creak and whisper winding itself around me like a noose. The elder auctioneer's eyes were not eyes. They were voids, rimmed in bone-white plates, humming with the resonance of all the swallowed sounds. When they spoke, the floor bowed.
Bid, or the house will pay.
I closed my eyes, and then I spoke my offer. My voice broke the hall's balance. It sounded too loud, even though I only whispered. The air thickened around me, and every candle bent its flame toward the dais, like worshippers bowing their heads. I felt the words leave me, not as sound, but as currency. They went into the room and did not come back. I had offered the only thing I could bear to lose, a memory. Not years, not blood, not the marrow of time itself. A memory, small, private, and yet heavy enough to sink when I let it go. The elder auctioneer's hand closed. A jar on the table hissed. The mist inside bloomed like ink in water, and its tag curled with my address. My uncle's cabin had been marked.
It is weighed. It is bound.
The room exhaled. Bidders stepped back, eyes down. My knees sagged, and I caught myself on the edge of the table. When I looked down, the jar pulsed faintly, as if tasting the echo of what I had surrendered. The mist inside coiled into a shape that almost looked like a child's handprint pressed against glass. Then it vanished. The auction ended as it had begun, without fanfare, no applause, no prayers. The bone-colored plates told once more, and silence surged outward like a tide. Candles went out in waves, and the townsfolk slipped from the hall as shadows more than people, their footsteps refusing to be heard. Outside, the air was sharp and metallic. The mountains leaned close. I walked back to the cabin under a sky split open with stars that gave no warmth. When I opened the door, the stillness hit me first. Not the wrong quiet that had stalked me since I arrived, but a fullness, a silence so thick it pressed on my eardrums until they ached. I called out just to hear my own voice, but the sound dropped flat at my feet. It did not echo, it did not rise, it simply died, strangled in the air. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, the screen was blank. Every recording I had made was gone, every file corrupted. The voicemail from my mother was ash in memory. Even my own name, when I mouthed it, felt brittle, already fraying. The silence I had bought seeped into the walls, into the beams, into the marrow of the house. It thickened the air until every movement sounded wrong, every breath smothered. My eyes ached for noise the way a throat aches for water. And somewhere inside that silence, something moved. Not a whisper, not a footstep. The shape of sound folded and crushed until it bled without bleeding. I dreamed that night of jars breaking, of mist rising, of homes left with nothing but voices that never belonged to them. I dreamed of my uncle, chin tilted, smiling that half smile, and his lips moved, but no sound came, only silence pouring out, heavy as tar, staining the floor. I woke to find the cabin colder than it should have been. The plastic over the vents bowed inward, straining as though something outside were drawing breath. In the kitchen, the faucet dripped. The drops fell, but no sound followed. Water struck porcelain in total muteness, rippling without a voice. They had taken more than I offered. That much was clear. The auction never ends where you expect. The silence you win is never the silence you keep. The house knew it. The town knew it. Even the mountains knew it, their snow-muffled slopes leaning inward, closing the circle. I thought of leaving, of taking the car and driving until the bowl was a memory, but memory was no longer mine to hold. My bid had seen to that. At the threshold, the silence clung to me, heavy as chains. It followed like a patient shadow, ready to walk into the world with me, to spread beyond the bowl's ring. I closed the door. I do not know if I shut the silence inside or out. I only know it did not matter. Somewhere behind me, faint and fragile, the sound of bone-colored plates told again. Not in the lodge, not in the mountains, in the marrow of my own skull. The auction was not over, and it never would